And it's time to call the special workshop of the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District to order. And roll call, please.
All right, Manager Loaf, Manager Schmaltz,
Here.
Manager Baki,
Here.
Manager Tapes,
Here.
President Anderson.
Here. All right, we're only shy one, so we are going to dig right in or dive right in. And I'm going to let Emily, everybody knows, I think, what we're trying to do here, and that's take a look at the increased levy, and then what cuts would still be needed, if any. So that's the first one we're going to look at, and the other one is a refinement of what we saw last time. I think showing, was it showing cuts, Emily, or grants? Or I can't remember.
We're showing uncertain grants.
There we go. All right, grants. So let's start that with Emily. Do we have different? Yeah, we have different colors. So if you want to get us started, the green one is the one you want to start with.
Okay. President Anderson, managers, I will actually pull up the budget revision log, and that might be kind of a simpler, just to start with, just as a very high level overview of the different iterations. So the original draft, the sort of starting point, we just put everything in the budget that the board talked about at that budget visioning workshop, and we kept the levy flat just as a starting point, just to kind of see where we land. That budget didn't balance, but it was kind of the starting point for discussion. At the last budget workshop, we went through an iteration of the budget where we had added in the number of uncertain grants that we have. We've applied for several grants. They might come through, and they might come through in time to have some revenues in 2026. So did a version of the budget that includes those and assumes that we do receive those grants. And those are listed here. But then the most recent iteration is this idea, this balanced budget with cuts. And the board also talked about this at the last workshop of, okay, what would it look like if we scaled back expenditures? How much would this impact our momentum? What would this look like? So just kind of another data point on the scale for discussion. And so the board had talked about some potential levy increases. And so this is probably the upper end of what the board has been sort of considering, and I'll zoom in a little bit here. So this scenario puts a 20% levy increase out there to work with. There's obviously, considerations that the board's going to want to think about with that. Once the county tax impact calculators come out, we'll want to look at what that might be. I will say that we received the net tax capacity for the current year, which is used for the 2026 levy. And that's the apportionment. So what proportion is Chisago County? What is Washington County within our boundaries? And the form that they sent us, the net tax capacity actually went down compared to last year. And Mike Kinney responded to them and said, "Are you sure this is right?" And kind of asked them for some more information. I don't know if he's received a response from them. They might still be working on it. It goes through kind of a system at the county. So just things to keep in mind, but here's just for the starting point for discussion. This budget version has a 20% levy increase. This budget also has an increase in grant revenues by $72,000. And this is kind of pulling from that other version above. These grants are unconfirmed, but in order to come to a balanced budget, this would really help the district's position if we were able to get this Section 319 federal grant. It's I think I mentioned it last time, it's the Small Watershed Focus grant. It's intended to be stable funding for multiple years, but there's just uncertainty at the federal level right now. So we're really hoping that we can get this. And the grant itself will be more than $72,000. So we could probably apply it to other projects if needed, but at a very minimum, having that $72,000 to cover the match portion of those two projects is we would be able to do that. Those are the revenue increases for this. And so this iteration of the budget included about 560,000 in expense cuts. I'll say on the whole, some of these cuts are tougher than others. I'll just go through them and we can kind of stop and pause and talk about each one in more detail if you want. So feel free to jump in if you have questions. But the first one, kind of an easy, just take and replace that 72,000 in revenue from the Section 319 grant. That would be essentially moved over to grant spend. So it's still reflecting in the expense budget, but we're just saying this is funded by a grant. So just moving that over in the budget. So it still shows on the total budget, but it's just earmarked for grants. Also in the project section, this was actually the final item that I did, but I wanted to put it up here next to the projects that are associated with the grant. We could reduce, the general project development / pre-project investigation, which is primarily EOR costs. And that's, local dollars that go to EOR to kind of, seek out various questions that we might have or, be furthering along projects that we don't yet have a grant for. And so under this scenario, we would really have to say, okay, EOR can't go out and kind of be doing project development unless we have a grant in hand. So some examples of this are that Sunrise River Headwaters Project Development Grant. That was about 90,000 that is going toward pre-project investigation. And so we got that grant in hand and we said, EOR, hold off until the grant is executed. And now they're working on that. So that is totally covered by a grant and staff time is providing the match. Another example would be, we applied to a couple of Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Fund grants, which we've been talking about. If those are awarded, there is a certain amount of grant dollars allocated in each of those for professional services. So we could, once those grants are awarded and executed, then we say, okay, EOR, start doing project development on these two things, but now we have a grant to bill it against. So we'd really have to kind of commit to that and the timing of it and everything. And so that would bring that we would cut 27,000, it would bring it from 75,000 down to, sorry, I'm going to skip around a little bit here, but just want to have all the numbers for you. One moment, please. Bring it down to 47,000, almost 48,000. Okay. So two additional revenues and some expense cuts in projects in this scenario. Another big item is it's on the budget overview. We've got total staff wages and benefits, and then that total number is the driver for all of the numbers that get sorted out into the programs and project categories. So Mike Kinney looked at his budget and he advised that we could bring it down to 1.1 million in order to just cover the current permanent staff. If we didn't hire the business and operations manager, if we didn't hire any seasonal technicians in this scenario, it would be a matter of perhaps waiting, hire the business and operations manager, maybe further along in part of the administrator succession plan. And then the seasonal techs, we could apply for a Clean Water Fund Conservation Corps grant to get an individual placement and or have the Conservation Corps crews come out and help us with project maintenance or monitoring or what have you. These are kind of smaller items, but trying to look at anywhere where we can make cuts, and obviously the board can discuss and decide if you want to consider it or not. But wanted to note that one of the items that it was not a cut, but it needs to happen in order to meet the budget that we had, is that we are currently paying for property taxes at the district office. I know President Anderson, you're working on that, working with the building owners to see if we can get that removed. And so that draft 2026 budget assumes that those property taxes get removed.
And currently that's 12,000 per year, correct?
That's, yeah, estimated.
Yeah, I saw it's about 1,000. I remember something close to that. Well, the other part of this though, and you know, you've got to keep your fingers and toes crossed to see if it's gonna work, but there is the potential to get at the back 10 years of property taxes as well. And so the owner is, this all has to go through the owner, so the owner is pursuing that as well. And if that happens, then we've got that times 10, roughly, you know. It'll be a little less in the years backwards.
So so we're depending upon the owner doing this for us?
We have to, that's the way it works. The owner of the building has to be the one that submits that's why I was working so closely with them. You know, holding their hands, getting the phone call set up with the proper person after I talk to them, of course. So everything's in, it's been in for a number of months now, and so it's up to the assessor to make the decision, and so we're just waiting on the assessor.
I mean, taxes are taxes, so what's their?
Not for government units. Not for government units, so there is this forgiveness in the law, so.
But I mean, what's he gotta assess? I mean, he's gonna lose $12,000, but it's still.
It's not the owner that makes this decision, it's the assessor that comes out, or team member from the assessor staff that comes out, does their own investigation of the site, does their own investigation of how long we've been here, and have we been, you know, here for all that time? Have we been at the same square footage the whole time? So they do their own investigation. And then when they're done and everybody's approved it, then it's granted. So we just have to wait.
But just going forward, though.
No, I just said, we've asked for the last 10
10
years
years,
as
okay.
well, that we've been here, so that's the iffy part.
All right, good.
You know, the current forward is, if they agree, obviously, it's a certainty. And they may have questions, so who knows? But the past is what I'm not certain of, if that will be granted.
I was thinking trying to get Fran Murin involved, but he's not, he doesn't. have
No,
anything to do with
he
it.
has nothing to do with it,
Okay, so I was gonna make that suggestion. but-
yeah. No.
Sorry for the interruption there.
Well, that's okay. I figure we can just kind of have a discussion on these as we go or at the end. I'll just keep going down the list. You know, we've got some budget for new computers. They're due for replacement, but if we wanted to like push it off another year, if the computers are doing fine, if, you know, we're kind of basic use, we could push that off. It'd be cutting about $7,500. Something for the board to consider. The rule review, so kind of getting into the program section, we had $60,000 budgeted for basically mostly EOR. There's some legal time in there too, to go through this process of evaluating the effectiveness of our rules and going through some potential revisions. And so we could, if we wanted to split it out over multiple years, we could cut that 60,000 in half. I will say, and I'm hoping to bring it to a future board meeting here soon. There's really not a lot of grants out there for regulatory work. However, we're getting sort of creative in our grant writing. And, you know, there's a grant program out there from a private foundation that wants to initiate mindset changes and systems change for things. And, you know, that's really what we're trying to do in a lot of aspects, and specifically the shoreline element. And regulatory is a big part of shoreline mindset change. So I think I'm going to try to write it. I've been working with other staff, maybe requesting some grant funds for this, which could offset some of that spending, and we'd still be able to do it in the same year if we are successful with that grant. We talked about this, Mike Kinney mentioned this last time. If we wanted to make some cuts to monitoring, one starting point might be we can alternate the types of stream monitoring that we do. Because right now in the budget, there is long-term legacy sites that EOR does for us. There's also diagnostic monitoring, kind of going through phases of diagnostic monitoring and iterations to kind of keep our finger on the pulse of the watershed and be looking out for issues that might be happening in the various tributaries to our lakes. So if we wanted to make a cut, we could alternate. 1 year do long-term stream sites, the other do diagnostic monitoring. So we could cut about 39,000 if we wanted to do that. Cost share, this one's kind of hard, but it's one of those areas where, so just for discussion purposes, we could cut 40,000 from the residential cost share program. We could add it back in if grants are awarded. And so the thing with on the ground best management practices, rain gardens, shoreline restorations, the kind of projects we're funding, there are a lot of grant programs out there designed for just that purpose. And so if we wanted to kind of go out for those grants, and we've had some success currently. One that comes to mind is the Midwest Glacial Lakes Partnership, which we're working under right now, and that's paying for some shoreline projects, some education, going out for those kinds of programs. And then we can fund our cost share program through those and essentially pass through those grants to the residents. There's also grant programs out there that wouldn't even require the district to be fiscally involved. It's the what's it called? Pollinator pathways or habitat incentive landscape program, habitat enhancement landscape program through Bowser. And that's one where residents can apply directly to the Board of Water and Soil Resources and get money for converting their lawn to like a pollinator type of garden or other kinds of BMPs like that. So there's lots of grants out there that we could go for and that we are going for, but then that just means we don't have those levy dollars on hand to be awarding to people if those grants aren't awarded. So it's a little bit of a risk. We've been making a lot of momentum with that cost share program, and Aiden's doing a ton of site inspections, and he's estimating that we'll spend up our budget this year. Oh, sorry, one moment. I got to admit Mike from the waiting room. He must have dropped. One moment, making him co-host. Okay. And so it's nice to have that secure levy funding so that if someone applies, we know exactly how much is available at the start of the year. Someone applies and we can pass through those levy funds to them for that BMP. But under this scenario, we cut 40,000 from that local funding and go out for grants to supplement that. Kind of similar situation with education. There is a lot in the education budget, and there are some cuts that we could make, and then add those dollars back in if we get a grant. A couple of items, so we had proposed cutting 30,000, basically bringing the education ongoing initiatives local spend from 64,000 down to 34,000. And some of the things that we could cut would be, kind of the extras, like having food at events or buying swag to hand out, or like Adam will do a community education event and each attendee will get a book. We could cut the freebies like that. We could cut our Blue Thumb partnership, which is relatively minimal. It's $300 a year, but it's, something. And then there's 20,000 in the education budget earmarked for a shoreline PR firm. And so that's in the 2026 budget. We are doing work with the shoreline PR firm here in 2025. And so if we get a really good outcome and deliverable from this 2025 work, maybe staff could take that and run with it, and Adam and Aiden could kind of go forth and carry out that work. And it would just minimize the amount of consultant time. There's other things that we could get into with the education budget. There's a lot in there, events, mailers, printable materials, things like that, but highlighting a few of those items. And then the standard project signage effort as well. You know, there's very simple signs that we could do that meet the grant requirements of, you know, the name of the project and the Clean Water Fund logo, and they could be relatively small, but kind of meet that requirement. It costs more money to do these bigger signs that are readable from the road or kind of more interactive educational signs. And so if the board wanted to do cuts, we could kind of scale back that signage effort, kind of just meeting the minimum requirements. And then moving forward, we are putting in all of our grant budgets, the signage element. So getting future project signs paid for by the grant. And then finally, in the AIS category, if we wanted to make cuts, we could kind of further prioritize the watercraft inspection program. We've got pretty close to full coverage, as I understand it right now, on weekends, and then plus some weekday coverage from our partnership with Chisago County. And so, you know, just as a discussion point, right now we've got $50,000 budgeted for local spend on the watercraft inspection program. Could cut that to 25,000 and really just kind of focus our efforts on the weekends, on the highest traffic times. We've collected a lot of data over the years and would be able to kind of prioritize that, but we wouldn't have full, you know, more sun up to sundown coverage. And then finally, you know, when you're looking at the budget and considering what are some of the bigger items that we might want to take a look at, herbicide treatments are a really big one. And so if we scaled back, you know, particularly Forest Lake is the biggest lake of ours, and the board just paid, I think, $80,000 to $90,000 for curly leaf pondweed management on Forest Lake this year. You know, that's a big cost that we could, if we wanted to make cuts, we could look at. That is a summary. So all of those total up to about 560,000. I'll just pause there for questions, discussion.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, Emily, I just want to point out one other thing. I think you picked up most of the ones we discussed when Mike was with us. But one of the big ones was permitting. And permitting, we're spending about $293,000 a year. And I know that they're looking at now how do we compare with, you know, other watershed districts and getting some of that money back. So if a decision's made and we can maybe, you know, give that back to the community, about 2/3 of that, that would save quite a bit of money. So we should probably put a location for permitting here, so we can put a number in there when it becomes available.
Yes, that's a good point. You know, we're looking at under our current system, how can we bill more of that kind of permit review time against the permits themselves, and then completing that rule review and changing our fee structure to be more similar to the watershed districts. Finishing that process will really help.
We're getting 80% of their money back, so if we got 70% back, that would save us $210,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has to be, it's all fees, the fees for
Right,
time,
right,
that's all it is.
right.
So I don't
So-
think our fee structure has been updated since we started in
So
2007.
that'd be almost as important as raising the levy.
Well, I think it's what Mike was talking about last time as being as efficient as possible. And I don't think that maybe there are some routine things that should be done and reviewed on a more regular basis, maybe even annual.
Sure.
To make sure that we're keeping up with increases in time, you know?
So Emily, could you put that as a placeholder, just put permitting below AIS, and then maybe put in 293,000 costs? And put like 50% savings, question mark, and then let the staff figure out what that number, and then the board will have to approve it. But that's a pretty big impactful item, so
I think that has to be done regardless of what we do with the budget. That's a process that should have been updated.
No, I agree,
So,
there's
yeah.
two factors, but the fact, I'm more concerned about the dollars that are gonna save us.
Of
so.
course you are,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is that that is a systemic correction that needs to be made, not just this one-time budget. It'll impact going forward. But anyway,
Doug or Dave, do you have any other ideas that
I
you
have
wanna offer?
I do have a question, Emily. If we go back to the AIS category, and we were to cut the herbicide treatments, do we have a dollar amount as to how much we would save by perhaps having the lake associations pay for their own treatments or some other means other than the watershed paying for it?
Well, it's 61, that recommended $61,000 cut.
That would be the total amount for all lakes?
Well, only for Forest Lake, because nobody else is being cut. Doesn't
Well,
make any, the only ones that are
But
so
I'm
small, it doesn't make any.
Steve, you were asking for some ideas. That's what I'm suggesting. Is if we were to cut all AIS treatments for all lakes, what would that amount be?
Well, for the other two lakes, it's $7,000, I think, and then what's left now would be, I think there's 25,000 in there. The lake, there's no way the Lake Association or the city could afford to do that, so it's probably not a
Well, I
feasible.
disagree, Steve. I mean, the Bone Lake Association has set money aside for that very thing and has not had to spend it. So Emily, do we have a figure for what that number would be?
Yeah, I can get that one moment, please.
If it's not that much, then, fine, but if it's something that we could look at, it could help us out.
Okay, so we've got 54,000 currently budgeted for flowering rush, curly leaf, and some for purple loose stripe. No, sorry, one moment.
I see Mike.
I'm trying to
has his
just take
hand up.
up blue water science. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Mike. In the meantime, I'll tally this up.
Madam President, managers, another area in the AIS, I guess, in terms of engaging our partners and lake associations, et cetera, there's our watercraft inspectors program. That's a pretty sizable number in terms of budget impact as well. But I think there'd be consensus that we want to maintain that, but again, when we just part of our engagement and public relations component, it's putting all these things on the table and asking, what do we want to have for our communities?
well, that's the big discussion I think that we don't need to address
Now,
now.
right,
Right now, we're feeding information into the board, especially our newer managers, so that you understand the process. And if we get to a situation like we're in right now, where it's a revenue issue, there's only two things you can do. Look for new revenue sources by increasing the levy or all these other things that we're gonna talk about here, today and later on, but at another time, but the other thing is cutting services. And I'm not ready to do that. This isn't a crisis where we have to start cutting back. When we cut back, then it sends signals, not just to staff, but also to the community on what we're not doing. Doesn't matter what we've done, it's what we're not doing for them, and that becomes very visible and contentious. We've made such good progress. That's the other thing. It's a shame to cause that progress to go backwards under our own deliberations. Deliberately doing that is not a good thing in my mind. And we are with something as visible and maybe hits more people than anything we do is the boat launch program. The last yearly report was very significant. If you look back at history and where we started, And where we are now, Comfort Lake, for example, is down to 4% input of AIS because of the boat launch program. Over the 10 years, 14, 12 years, whatever it's been, that we've had it. And that's a true success.
2014 was the first year we did it.
Okay, thank you, 2014. I know it was back there a ways. So it's Chisago County's program that they brought to us, covering Washington County because it's all part of the same watershed. And we've added our own people to that program. And so it's been very, very successful. I just would hate to see that go backwards because of the situation we're in right now, which is solvable without destroying that program. So that's my thought on that whole process. And I know Bone Lake has always had a very active and integrated community, and that's wonderful. That's not true with all the lakes. Because it is something that affects the public, not just the people that live on the lake, their enjoyment of the lakes. So I just think it's something that we should continue. We're doing it right, so we might as well continue to do it right. And when we talk
Manager
about,
Anderson?
yes,
Well, I think we're talking about two separate issues. One, I think you're talking about the boat inspection program.
mhm,
And then there's the AIS program, which is the herbicide treatment,
I thought we were done
a
with that.
number
I'm
of
sorry.
things. And I think those
Yeah.
are two separate things that we can talk about.
You did-
Look at the numbers for the boat inspection program. Look at the numbers for what we're spending for herbicide treatment of AIS. And I think, Forest Lake is taking a large chunk of that money to treat Forest Lake. It is a service that the watershed has provided. It's a wonderful service. I know the Bone Lake Association is greatly appreciative to the watershed district for funding that for many years. But at some point we have to make some decisions. So let's look at the numbers and let's be objective. We're not making any decisions here, but let's just get the facts.
Okay, well, the facts are that the post launch inspection program was cut in half, so we saved $25,000 there. And the Forest Lake was reduced by 36,500, 71%. So there's $15,000 left there. So if you want to cut any more out of the boat launch, you'd have to take the remaining 25,000 or the remaining 15,000 for the Forest Lake. And then if we did Bone Lake and Comfort Lake would be about another 7,000 if I recall. But so we've got those numbers. I think we should probably move on and try to take a bigger look at this picture. And I was gonna suggest we look at page 4 and have Emily take us through where these cuts are, how we can see how much you cut and how much revenue we're getting in each area. It's a very simple chart, but it kind of shows us what Manager Anderson was saying is that we're cutting $560,000 out of our program area and et cetera. So I'm not sure we can afford to do that. So it gets us thinking about other things and how we might want to address that issue from a more macro viewpoint, top down. Do you have that page 4, Emily? This would be the one where you balance the budget.
Yes, I can pull that up. And just to Manager Baki's earlier question, total that's earmarked for just the treatments, so excluding Blue Water Science time, is about 50,000.
Thank you.
And then Water Science is about 28,000. And that's in some of those same line items, those AIS management. It's Blue Water Science and treatment contractor.
Right, but Blue Water Science isn't the actual herbicide treatment, right? It's more about
No.
gathering data to make those decisions. So again, that
Yep.
might be separated out. We're just looking at the treatment cost alone. That's what I'm suggesting we look at. Thank you.
Yep.
I thought you had a list like that, or did I just ream it up here? I thought you took all the cuts.
Yeah, you did. It's on the budget we're looking at now.
Okay,
Yeah.
on page 4, is that it?
Well, that's the macro view, yes, which I think we need to understand the total big picture before we get into the details.
Can you see the expense revenue recap here on the screen?
Yeah, so why don't you just tell us how much more, I've got the numbers here if you want them, but for example, on the tax levy, we're gonna increase the tax levy $362,000, which is 20%. So that yellow 2167 is up 362,000, so that's a big contribution of revenue towards, we had to pick up $1 million, basically. $994,000, so that takes up 1/3 of the 994 we have to get to make it zero at the bottom. And then we've added one more uncertain grant back in, that $72,000 grant. So there's 72,000 income from that. And then, you'll notice that on uncertain grants up in revenue, we've got, we've talked about those grants, but we've only put in 72,000 of the, there's 312,000 left. So there's always a possibility that we could, if we feel comfortable, we could put some percentage of that back in and allow us to add some more programs back in. So that's kind of a opportunity for us to put some money back into the programs again. Administration, we cut out, actually for the total expenditures, you'll see we're down to 4,159. And that is a reduction of 560,000 that we've taken out. And that gets us down to where we're $0. So we've got 560,000 out of programs, many of which we can't really afford to leave. We've got 72,000 in extra grants that we've added back in, and we're gonna have 362,000 from the increase in the levy.
Where's the carryover for the 6 months in 2006 that we need from 2005?
The reserve is 25%.
Do we have a number for that? That's 25% of,
It's on that chart that she has,
Or,
the next page over.
4,200?
The year-end reserve fund balance at the end of 2025 would be 1.03 million. And so that would be what we start 2026 with. And if we have a balanced budget, we end with 1.03 million. And so that's what we're starting 2027 with.
And that's on page 3?
Page 7.
4. Oh,
4. Okay, we gotta be looking at the same things now. Okay, here we go. So we're gonna end the year of 2025 with 1.4 million.
No, the beginning.
2005 estimated year end, I'm looking at the column. And at the fund balance, January, oh, that's 31st, January 1st, yeah, that would be the end of 2025. There's 1.4 million.
no, sorry,
And-
I'm trying to format it like the audit does, and it's a little bit confusing this way, but the fund balance as of January 1st, 2025 would be, it was 1.4 million. At the end of 2025, it'd be 1.03 million.
Ah, I'm looking at it wrong. Okay, so it's the next column over, correct?
Right.
2006,
because there's-
the brown header,
2026, yep, January 1st, 2026, the fund balance would be 1.03 million. And with the balanced budget, then at December 31st, 2026, it'd be the
of the
same.
same amount.
Yep.
And that's by cutting out $500,000 roughly from the budget that we started with,
Yep,
right? So without
Yes.
those cuts, that defense budget would be almost $5,000 for $5 million in 2026,
500,000, yeah,
500,000 more. And right now
less.
it's, less.
Or, well, the expense budget would be $500,000 more. The year-end fund balance would be 500,000 less.
Yeah. All of your cuts are built into the numbers that are aggregated up here, correct? That
Yes.
already includes the cuts. So
Yep.
we're looking at expenses of 4.159 million. I'm not gonna do all of it, let's just say 4.2 million. So that's our expense for 2026, correct?
Yep, if we do the cuts.
Okay, and our revenue is predicted to be the same amount.
If we do a
Including-
20% levy increase and
Mhm.
include a grant that we hopefully get, we might not.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so where are we, where are we picking up that money? Is it the grant? How much is that grant? That we don't know if we're gonna get or not, but
72,000.
it's 72,000. So
Yep.
where's the other 430 million savings? That's what we're talking about, right?
Well, they're all the programs we cut. Those totaled out to be 568,000.
Yeah, but this is roughly 430, so are we missing something? Are we missing something?
No, I mean, it's all here. So we got 560,000 that we've cut out of the budget. We've added an extra grant of 72,000 back in. We've not added the other 312,000. We could add part of that back in if we wanted. Grants that we're not in there now that are unforeseen,
Mhm.
and then we've got the levy,
Yeah, the levy's 360,000 additional.
362, 362 is what I figured. So. From what it was on the previous sheet.
Where are you budgeting for the carryover? Where does that come in under the expensive side?
Right now, there is no carryover because at our estimated 2025 expenses are estimated to exceed revenues by 397,000.
But this one, the one I'm looking at is the one with the increase in the levy, correct?
What's your question? I'm not sure.
Well, I'm trying to find out, there should be a carryover amount in one of these categories to make the levy, the carryover, which is part of the levy, it should be. So I don't see that anywhere. I don't see where we're spending, where we're putting aside any money for carryover. It should show up if it's in,
Well, we have
Built into
the
the
reserves,
expenses.
$1 million at the end of the year.
I'm asking, where does it appear in this sheet? I see a balanced budget here. I do not see a carryover of $1 million.
Fund balance December 31st.
Okay. If you look at this top part here, that's revenue. If you look at the second part, it's expenses. You don't just have this magic thing sitting out here called a carryover. It's gotta come from the revenues that you've taken in for that year. So where is that? Where is that
It
represented?
comes from 2025. We ended up 2025 with $1 million. We have a balanced budget, so it didn't go up or down, so it just carries over. We ended up with, we're gonna end up with $1,033,000. Okay, so now we have a balanced budget, so it doesn't go up or down, it starts at 1,033,000, ends up at 1,033,000.
Hmm.
The year before it went down because we overspent. So you'll notice that we started out at 1,431, but ended up with 1,122, because we overspent by $309,000. And this year we're gonna overspend by 397. So it goes from 1,431 down to 1,033.
Well, okay. All of that carryover is staying in this one particular line item,
Right,
not built into our budgets.
it's built into
Which
the
is
budget. It's the same format we've used every year.
No, what you're showing is a consistent line item or fund balance that's going down from one year to the other because we tapped into that. It's not showing where we're going to have that fund balance replenished. It doesn't show that. Anyway, the point is, I talked with the CPAs at Redpath. I know Emily worked with one of the new ones that we have. We had come on board on our account, which is a good thing. Her name's Bonnie as well. So we've got two Bonnies. But I talked with the previous one, Rebecca Horde, or Jessica, I just want to call her Rebecca. Jessica Ford today. I reached out to our top guy and he was busy, so she and I had a nice conversation today about the approach the board should be looking at. She doesn't recommend doing any of these outside types of revenue streams that we've been trying to plug the holes with, if you will. And she is very familiar with our accounts, and so we had like I said, a nice conversation about it. What she recommended is that Redpath do a top line 5 to 10 year budget for the board, based on our 4-year plan and our strategic plan. And before we make any final decisions, that they have them come in and present at one of our workshops, what their recommendation would be to keep our forward momentum, and see what that shows for us. And that would give us, I think, a really good foundation so that we can look at from the CPA viewpoint, company that deals with watersheds all over the state. And I think that would be very helpful. And we would save a lot of time and energy by recommending that they do that. It's not gonna be my decision alone, it has to be the board's. But I think that we would benefit from having that type of expertise, helping us out of this situation. The question for me is, whether or not, I thought we talked earlier at the beginning of these workshops, that we wanted to not interrupt our program, forward momentum. You know, there wasn't a program that anyone wanted to reduce or get rid of. So we've got to have some foundational items that we believe in before we can go forward, because it's going to come into that talk eventually.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I'm not sure we can do a 10-year analysis like they want to do, but.
Well, I think we can do a 5-year. We're about 5 years into our 10-year.
I think we can work through this in over a 2 or 3 year period. And
It's a long-term, we have to have a long-term solution. We can't make up, the number that we have to make up is 1.9 million. That's that net negative that we have, net position negative. So we have to fill that gap too. So I don't want to make any mistakes when we do this. All right?
So let me make a suggestion with what we've got here. I agree with you, the 560,000 cutting out of the programs is too extensive.
Mhm.
And what I looked at, some of those cuts can be put in there, and I did a quick analysis. And I'm gonna say that probably half of that probably can be cut out without too much of a problem. We can have that discussion at a separate time.
Mhm.
Which ones we keep and which ones we don't. So that would be part of the contribution. The other thing we could do is, we could look at possibly putting some of those other grants back in, depending on the
Mhm.
risk. That might add another 100,000 that would help us get toward that goal. And the third thing we can do is, I think probably the best way to cover any slack that we have on the program is to consider another small loan to get us through this coming year. And if you look at, I did a quick analysis on that. For every 100,000 that we borrow at 1.5%, we need to pay back each year for 7 years, just under $16,000. So if, for example, if we took a $300,000 loan this year, we'd have to pay back $47,000 for the next 7 years. But in turn, we pick up $250,000 in our budget. And if you look at that $47,000, that's about 2.7% of our levy. So you could probably build that into your levy over and above the stuff we need to get through this year. And that would cover us for
What was your total amount? 300?
300,000, yeah.
The interest isn't really the issue, even at 1.5, it's so small, but it's the payback. The payback is 7 years, it used to be 10, so.
Right, so that takes us, with paying off the interest and everything else, we'd have a payback of 47,000 a year.
Mhm.
But we did 300,000 for that this coming year when we need to cover some of the programs. So, so by working those against each other, we can come up with a solution, I think, for this year. And then, of course, we've got the levy up for next year also to cover that. Levy will be up, it'll be up again, maybe not 20% or whatever it is. But you could tack on another 2.7% to pick up some extra money that way too.
Well, and that's what we've been using, which has worked for us, but we went through that period where we had to tap into our overflow or our reserve fund with Highway 61 project right after during COVID and after
Right.
COVID.
Right.
And that's where the bulk of it comes from. The bulk of the hit is right there, $1 million. But we were spending, I think, things over a reserve them on a low increased budget. We've had 4 or 6% budgets, increases on the levy is all we've had over the last 4 or 5 years, so.
Emily, if we pick up, say we took $300,000, will we take that for next year, right? So when would that first payment be due? If we got it December of this year, when would the payment be due for the first year's 7-year payment? 2026?
It would be within the next 6 months after closing it. So as soon as we spend it, the next due date would either be June 15th or December 15th, so. it could be
Well, we
as
need that
soon
loan on the
as-
books at the end of the year to make us look whole, right? So that means it had to be done, it would have to be paid in June of 2026. So we'd have an extra 45,000 costs that we'd have to add into this whole thing. But we're gonna get 300,000 immediately, so that's more than covered. So it gives us a net gain of 250,000. Which more than offsets half of the 560,000 of the programs that we're spending. And the other half savings would come back from the cuts we wanna make. I think we can have that discussion maybe at the next meeting.
Mhm.
Do you follow what I'm saying, Emily? Am I?
Yeah, I can illustrate it for us. I've got a workbook I could show.
Manager
I
Manager
Anderson.
Baki, yeah, Manager Baki, I hear what you're saying about cutting, but I agree with Manager Anderson. Some of these programs we just can't cut. I went down, I wrote yes, no, or not a good idea. And we should probably all do that very quickly and just see where we come out. To see how much we can actually cut. And the big unknown is permitting right now. If we get permitting and we can get 70% covered by fees. That's going to give us, what? Almost $210,000. So our loan wouldn't even be that large.
President
And they'll
Anderson,
work-
Yes. That's Bucky.
I'm all in favor of having Redpath come into our next meeting and sit down and talk with us. I think, we're paying them for their services anyway. I would assume they would do that gratis. That would be a smart thing to do, I believe. We already owe over $3 million.
Right.
Is that correct, Emily? That's what I read in your notes. And so for us to take out more loans, I'm not in favor of that. Did you attend the CAC meeting on Tuesday, Manager Anderson, and did they provide
did.
any feedback?
I did.
Just an overview?
Just an overview. Yeah, and there wasn't any feedback to that, but I didn't get into this kind of detail.
But what was their overall feeling as to where we ought to be going?
Well, there wasn't any expression of that. There weren't any questions. There wasn't any expression about don't increase the levies or anything like that. And so I told them that we were looking over our programs and we're looking at everything. And we've got programs left to do, or not programs, projects left to do. And so that's pretty much about it. I didn't want to rattle the cages at that moment. I wanted them to know that we were taking a different approach this year. So that we got our priorities straightened out first on what we wanted to complete next year. And that we certainly want their input on those priorities. But it's going to, we're going to be using the entire summer to come up with the final budget. Because there are some things that we need to correct and look at. But that's pretty much it. Emily had a slideshow for us where she talked about where we're starting as far as the priority list. And that was pretty much it. I don't know if you've got that for the board tonight, but there was a really good slide in there from the strategic plan that I thought was good. And then you had a sort of a box slide that showed, columns with those priorities. And I think you also had one that included the various different revenue streams that we were beginning to talk about. So maybe you don't have to do it right now, but maybe we can find that and send that out to the board. So that's what they got, and some folks had to leave early, so we only met for about 30 minutes, and that was it.
Manager Baki, to answer your question, if you go to page 7, on this 10-year forecast. Not that it's accurate for 10 years, but the next couple of years are worthwhile. Our loan repayment is gonna be $514,000 for the next 4 years. So if we can cover that this year and come out with a balanced budget, because we've increased the levy and we've got additional fees coming in, et cetera, we'll be able to manage that, and our levy will be higher that each year from there on, and we'll be able to eat away at that pretty quickly. We got into this position over a 4 or 5 year period. We weren't saving any money and so forth, because we were trying to move ahead as fast as we possibly can. So we're not gonna get out of this in 1 year. It's gonna take 4 or 5 years, and if we put in place now some strategies that I'm recommending, we will be able to control this fairly quickly, as long as we don't have any other big surprises. So, so it's 514, and then we got an extra 270,000 or an extra 360,000 coming in starting next year and every year thereafter. Plus, we got another 8 or 10% levy increase each year. So the loan is not gonna get, and the highest it's gonna go is to add maybe 45,000 onto that number for the next 7 years. To get us through this year if we think we need a now $300,000 loan. But I think if permitting comes through, we won't even need that loan. And maybe we want to get it for that low cost of 45,000, maybe we want to take that just for insurance. Just to make sure we have a little extra cushion, but we can make that decision after we get the numbers fine tuned. So do you see that on chart 7? Yeah, she's got it highlighted, don't you?
Mhm.
Well, here I just did, if we added 300,000 in loan disbursements in 2026, that would bring the repayment, I just have it starting in 2027 just to make it even.
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
559,000.
She sounds muffled.
Emily, are your AirPods dying? They might
I
not
don't
be.
think so. Here,
Oh,
let me,
when you turn your head,
That's it.
okay,
Mhm.
I'm sorry about that. I'm looking at my other screen. If we, Steve Schmaltz's suggestion, if we were to take out another 300,000 in loans in 2026, for simplicity purposes, I have it starting repayment in 2027. I'm trying to zoom in here so we can see it, but and that repayment, 45,000 a year over 7 years. So that would bring our loan repayment amount up to about 560,000 for the years 2027 through 2030.
$567 or 560?
560,
Yeah, okay. That's what I had.
559, 734.
Okay.
So then, we have to make sure that we're budgeting for that much money for those many years.
And
Just for-
I'm not
just for
suggesting
that.
we take the loan, I'm just
Just for
saying,
that.
that's the cheapest way to get additional money. If you looked at the
Mhm.
options we looked at yet last meeting. I mean, we're not gonna, a line of credit is almost 6%,
Mhm.
and then a bond, we don't wanna do a bond because it takes us into the public eye.
Well, it's an expensive process.
Yeah, and it's
cumbersome.
gotta be for one big project,
No, it can be for multiples.
Yeah, but, okay, but I don't think we wanna have this discussion, in front of the whole community.
Well, maybe not, but you know, there are some districts that budget for their 10-year plans.
1.5% is the cheapest we're gonna get, so it's
Yeah.
really, if we get it in 3 months.
Well, that's always been what we've known,
So-
and that's why we've.
So it's a good
chosen this.
fallback position to have in our back pocket if we need to take 100 or 150 or 300. But we needed to get that permitting number worked out. That's the key leverage point for us right now, and it wasn't even on the list, so.
Well, I think these are all good inputs. We're not making a decision tonight, but those are all good inputs that we all need to think about.
Right,
As we grind through this process, and by the end of the summer, we're going to have a really good budget that everybody agrees with. And no one feels like we've left anything behind,
and then
hopefully.
I think when we get to that point, then we ought to have Red Path come in and just hear what we're recommending and see what they say.
Well, I don't agree with that. I do think that we have to have, Red Path sooner than that. The soonest that they can get something like that for us is, the end of July.
Well, what are they
So-
gonna, is it gonna be for 1 year or what's it gonna be? For?
They're going to put together a program that shows us how we can work with the levy over time to get us back into a positive position, but also not destroy this organization that we spent all this time building up and the good work that it does for the public. And I think I'm willing to listen to them. I'm willing to have that done, and I want to sit
Well-
and listen to them and their advice.
So have them come back with a proposal to us then, and then
Mhm.
also what the cost is gonna be.
Yeah.
Then we can vote on it. Because they're gonna do the same thing I did here.
Maybe,
They will. I've been through this too many times.
well, so have I in my career.
President
So-
Anderson,
Yes,
if I can comment here, I think it's
Yeah.
just prudent to bring in an outside organization that we work with, Red Path, and ask for their input and their advice. That only makes sense to me, and the sooner we can do that, the better. We don't have to make a decision on what they give us right away. I mean, it's more data, information from professional organization that, like you said, work with watershed districts throughout the state. So that only makes sense that we get their input as soon as we can.
I agree.
all right, that sounds good.
As long as they're not trying to do a 10-year forecast.
Manager Taves, do you agree with that?
What
Do we-
kind of a cost would be associated with this?
All right, I didn't ask. Whatever the cost, it's probably not gonna be as much as a mistake we make in the future, but I'll get that information for you.
And have them
Yeah.
actually what they're gonna do, so we can see what they're gonna do.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think I told you that, but-
All right.
all right.
So I agree with that. That'll be good to see what they have to say. What I thought we might wanna do next is try to get this cost thing, since we have a strong feeling about how we don't want to destroy the momentum.
Mhm.
Let's go through the suggested cost and see if we could get some agreement on that tonight. It shouldn't take very long.
On the project list?
Yeah,
The expense cut list, excuse
Right.
me, I mean,
we've discussed it a number of times now, so we should be in a position to say in or out. So, Emily, you wanna take us through that?
Sure. Steve, do you
Well,
want
I-
to show this version, your marked version that you'd sent me? Or I can just start with the clean version?
Yeah, that's fine. We could use that list. That's good enough.
Okay. This, I can fit all of them on one page here. Is this big enough, or do you want to?
No, just start at the top and scroll down. We can vote on each one. And we can write down the consensus vote.
Oh, okay.
vote what? Just for agreement with this?
Yeah.
Or
Right, whether you think we should take it out or whether we shouldn't cut it,
I'm not ready to do that tonight. I'm not.
okay? We'll
What
do it next
we're,
meeting.
what we're seeing as scenarios, what would our district organization look like if we had cuts? And we had this type of a levy increase? Well, are we going to get where we're going to need to be? That's the question. Okay, and then Red Path is going to be showing us the same type of thing, but at a higher level, if you will. Based on what we've said to date, which is that we don't want to slow down the momentum in our programs. So we're talking about programs here. We're not talking about the projects. The projects are separate. That's determined by our long-term, sub-watershed by sub-watershed approach to solving the problems throughout the district. So, and then we've got, separate from that, we've got our movement forward on our climate impact responsibilities, which is all of the extreme weather events and that we're having, and how do we control flooding? How do we help with even development? You know, are there areas that we need to work with our partners on to avoid that type of situation where they're building where they shouldn't be, based on the science that we have available? So about the landscape and the ecosystem. So those are bigger issues. I think I would certainly like to sit and study this a little bit more. I just was able to pick up the packet this morning. And I don't know about the others, but you know, we've only had a few days to look at this. So I'm not willing to say yes or no to anything right now. I think all this input on possible pathways is a good one. And when we get to that point in a few more weeks, then we can sit down and say yes to this and no to that, and everybody has a more tempered and learned position.
So can we set an objective for the next meeting then to go through and do, because we have to sort these, we can't move ahead until we know how we're gonna cut, what costs.
And I think we have enough information for us to move ahead with our research and our individual study and all of
Right.
that. Redpath cannot complete what they will do for us until the end of July. That was a firm, you know, date that she gave me. She wants to sit down with you and me and Mike and Emily beforehand to come up to that, you know, making sure they've got all the input factors that they need. So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna wait till July to work on this stuff. We gotta move ahead with what we're doing now, and there'll be a good check for us at that point in time. They'll have a good check. But by then, we have to have it pretty much worked out in terms of what we think we wanna do. And then have them come in and see if they agree with us or have some other suggestions to make.
But I'm saying that we don't need to make this decision tonight.
No, but
We
let's
do
set an
not.
objective to discuss it next meeting then, so we can move ahead. Otherwise, we'll just come to these meetings and not get anything done, so
Well,
I'm trying to move us forward here.
I'm getting information that I need to put
Okay.
into my, into the bag of things that I look at when I'm doing a budget. And when we have an issue that we're dealing with, that's one solution that you gave us. But we talked about that before, of doing at the last meeting, about using the loan program if we need to. So what.
I'm just
Redpath
trying
is
to bring the
going do-
numbers together so we can see what the impact.
What, one thing she did tell me on the phone today, when we were talking about all these different revenue sources and so on. And she said, it's always a better thing to resolve the problem through your levy, if you can, because everything else is just a Band-Aid. And so you've got a catch-up period, which of course is the payment of whatever resource you're using to get a loan or revenue coming in. So the real solution is working it through the levy program and the revenue path.
And other things like cutting costs where you can cut costs, where you can also shore off some of your fee costs to the public. Like in permitting, that would have a big impact on our stuff. Those kinds of things are very.
Well, that's a different thing. To me, that's an operational issue that needs to be addressed because we should have been doing that all along. We should have been updating our schedule based on economics. You know, what's happening year to year. So we fell behind on that. And we're not cutting out that program anyway. We're putting a new process in place that's going to require an annual review of those fees that we charge.
It's still gonna make a big contribution to our problem, so I just wanna make sure it's included.
But it's not specific to this budget. It isn't. It's an operational issue. We know it has to be done. And Mike knows about it now, and so we have to get working on that as fast as possible.
It has the same impact almost as a big increase in the levy. So it's very important to us to have that, and so.
If in
Okay.
fact that's a problem. I don't even know if it's a problem yet. I haven't compared the salaries that go into, or the cost that goes into those permit reviews with the actual money that's being charged or escrowed for those type of activities. So we don't even have that data yet to make a real, determination on whether or not we are losing money, or if we are, in fact, we're not there to make money on this stuff, but if that's what we want to do, charge more, we can certainly do it. But the point is that we're not shifting the burden of development to the general public. Okay,
So I did have a question on this, if I can ask
sure.
Emily. Emily, I think you did a good job in bringing in all those grants and that, and reductions. I had a question on the comment on the IES filter and the ag program for School Lake. Page 15. So if you look at those two lines. Get my original sheet, just a minute. So on our original budget sheet, for the IES filter program, you had, and this goes to the original budget we had 67,455 in local spent dollars for the one and 5,000 for the other. You see that?
Yes.
So that when you made this adjustment, you took out the 67,450. Why did we take that out?
That's a good point. That should have been moved over to grant and other revenue spend. Oh, I thought I did that. Yes, no, that's, it would still be an expense, but it has the associated revenue. Because the expense revenue recap includes the earned grant revenue there from here. Oh, the good point. This expense budget, that should be higher.
What line item is that for? What's the work or budget item?
555C. Because here's the original budget. We had 1.3 million in grant and other revenue spend, 57,000 in local spend, and 67,455 should be here. Huh, okay. Or, yeah. Alternatively, we have until the end of 2027 on our Clean Water Fund grant. If we wanted to push construction to 2027, we could reduce this and have the majority of the construction costs in 2027 and just have some engineering in 2026.
And then also on
Yeah, on this one too. We'll spend to zero, grant spend increases by 5,000. And so that offsets the 72,000 in revenues. And so then we're no longer balanced. Oh, my apologies. I don't know how I missed that. That should have been in there. So in order to reach a balanced budget, we would need to cut an additional 67,000 or increase revenues by even further, because current revenues are already in there.
And the other question I have is on those uncertain grants. Take, for example, 5-420-C, wetland enhancements.
Are you still on 15?
Yeah, page 15, it's down in wetlands, the last line in wetlands.
Okay.
So when you added that 100,000 back in, when you put all the grants back in there, remember that in the first version you did? You
Yeah.
added 100,000 back in there, but you didn't add any costs in. So if we put 100,000, do we have to put costs, local match dollars at the same time or not?
That 100,000 is the cost. So it'd be 100,000 in expenses plus receiving 100,000 in revenues. So it kind of cancel each other out. It doesn't really help the expense revenue balance.
Right.
The
But if you
match-
add 100,000 in there, then you've got to put 100,000 in the matching column, right?
Not necessarily. So with Lassard Sams, there's no minimum match, but your proposal is more competitive if you provide leverage. And so we said that all of our staff time, we're committed to funding locally, and so that is our leverage. So, and that's already factored in. You know, it's again, these staff items, it's just a generalization. It's just a formula to kind of give a sense of where the time is going. But we will be tracking very specifically all of the staff time associated with that project, and it'll go toward the leverage.
Okay, well, just let me rephrase it differently. Okay, now it's March of next year and we get the $100,000. And so now we want to move ahead and want to add it to the budget. So we got a grant of 100,000, which is right on the TBD is 100,000. What do we put in the local spend column?
Still zero.
0? We don't
Yeah.
have to match that grant?
We match it with the staff time, but that staff time, we'd be double counting if we added it here. I mean, I could subtract it from elsewhere in the budget, but you know, we're already budgeting for staff time in totality in the local spend throughout all of these columns, not just here, but you know, everywhere in the budget.
So then that 100,000 would carry over to the last column then.
Well, I don't, what do you mean by carry over into the last column?
Well, the 2026 expense budget draft.
Yep.
Those two columns have to add up, so the last column has to be 100,000, if there's no local match,
Right.
okay. So our budget goes up by 100, but we've got revenue to cover it by 100 because of the grant, so we break even,
Yep.
okay. And that's how the other ones would be treated also then, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's the only question I had. I was, well, sure I was,
The question that I have, and I do this every year. But why, or I think this every year, I don't think I've ever brought it forward, but why do we do our budgeting like the work plan? Why are we getting down into if this happens, then that kind of thing, especially with the deployment of the overhead expenses? And primarily, understand what you're doing is just the salaries, correct, that you bring down into these line items?
Salaries and benefits.
Salaries and benefits, but no overhead expense, correct?
Correct, because overhead is in the administration. We'd be double counting it if it was in the, it's it's got to be wages, benefits, you know, the payroll taxes, things like that, everything that's associated with keeping staff.
Right. So if it's an aggregated total just for the expense side, right? Of the people, I mean, salaries and benefits? And you said payroll taxes and all of that as well?
That's my understanding. Mike Kinney calculates that number. I don't have the details of that number.
Okay,
And Mike's
okay.
on the call.
Well, Mike, do you know off the top of your head how that's calculated? The bigger question for me is why aren't we just leaving the salaries, up in that administration area for overhead? And not trying to track it down to these line items where we have so much activity with grants and especially, well, grants in particular, that's where the side piece comes in, but we've got that overhead anyway. It's not costing us anything. So we don't really have to track it this way. And it just makes the budget much more complex. So why do we do it?
I thought the board requested that. That every
Well,
project had the staff assigned to it.
Yeah, I understand that, but what I'm saying from our top level management of the budget, we have staff, we're paying for the staff, how it gets allocated down to the projects is more of a work plan thing to me. It's not a budget thing. So
If it's
that's,
done right.
that's what I'm asking.
If it's not done correctly, then we've got garbage.
Well, that's what the work plan is for. We
Well, I
don't
just
need-
caught a mistake that was in there, so, so basically you have to understand how this thing works. One of the reasons I think we have it is because you have a matching grant, have local funds have to match with it. And we offload some of our salaries and that into that area. So we can cover that cost. And yet have some of the salaries paid for it. I think that's the major reason we do it that way.
salaries don't get paid for by those. We pay for it, that's our match.
I know, but it gets credited against the project, the budget, the budget for the grant. So
But if we didn't have grants that we were dealing with, right?
Mhm.
We would not do a budget that shows us the salary down at the line item level.
be all salary, be EOR and our salaries probably, and the vendors. So
Well-
the grant covers most of it for us. That's what
But we wouldn't budget like that for staff. We wouldn't go down to that project level for staff if we didn't have grants. So I'm
I
just
can answer
asking a
this.
question. Thank you.
Yeah, Mike, it appears lost connection, so he dropped off the call. But, this was something that when I first started, Mike was kind of changing over the budget format to more fit the watershed management plan. And what he wanted to do was he didn't want to put all of the staff wages, benefits, et cetera, under administration, because then it makes the administration portion of your budget look really high. And so he wanted to put some of it in administration, some in programs, some in projects. And then, we looked at it and said, well, okay, we could put total staff programs and give an estimate, what some
Mhm.
proportion of the total staff cost goes to programs. And he wanted it to go into each individual program. And so
Yeah.
I have the roll up at the top that sums up all of them from here. It's all of these items, each and every one. And this is what I've been trying to say. It's divided out based on, the work plan and the workload analysis, some estimate of FTEs. But it gets a little misleading because you look at, okay, 209,000 in permitting. Well, that doesn't mean that that's the exact cost of permitting. That means that 1.8 FTEs is going to permitting. And so
Mhm.
that proportion of the total staff spend is going there. That would be accurate if we had all of our staff spending an equal amount of time everywhere. But it gets kind of inflated because you've got higher paid staff that might be doing more work in other projects. Like your district administrator isn't spending a ton of time on permitting. It's more staff that are making a lower amount. And so this number looks probably higher than it actually is because everyone makes an actual different amount. It's not actual billing.
Right.
It's just a function
my
of the
point.
total.
And that's my point. We need to have full transparency on what we're spending on everything in a budget. It's really difficult when it gets this complex and we don't have a software system that handles anything I've never seen a budget done like this, honestly. I've seen work plans, but I've never seen budgets done like this. So it's always been problematic for me that it shouldn't take this time an effort that we spend on this every year. But, you know, that's something we can deal with, maybe later. I might call Redpath and ask them how other watersheds do it, but I just think we make it so much harder on ourselves when we're trying to do that. And thank you for finding that mistake, but how many others are there that we don't catch? So, anyway, something to think about as we move forward. But anybody else has any questions or comments on this particular version of what we're looking at? Any questions?
President Anderson?
Yes, Mr. Baki?
I think, you know, there are two assumptions we're operating under right now that I think we need to keep open. The first assumption is that the levy increase will be 20%. We have not made that decision yet, and I think we need to keep it open for discussion. The second assumption is that any cuts to programs will be a dismantling of the watershed district as it currently is. And I don't think that would be the case. If we make some reductions in programs, they're still going to be in there. They can still be there, they can still be functioning, but that's part of our budget process is we have to look at making some cuts somewhere. So I think those two assumptions are something we need to just keep up in the air and move aside so that we can look at the facts and make some good decisions as we work on this. I'm looking forward to hearing from Redpath. I think that's a great
Yes,
addition to our work here.
yeah. Okay, does anybody have anything to comment on or anything that they want to say? Doesn't have to be on this. But you're right, we're gathering information, as I said before, and we need to, all of us, each one of us has to do our own due diligence on these various options. We haven't talked too much about the other avenues for revenue, but I would like to hear from Redpath first as well. And if there's any alternative, our ace in the hole, if you will, has always been the MPCA loan, as Manager Schmalz has talked about tonight. So we do have that always that we can use. And that, of course, comes with some cuts, as he's listed and as Emily gathered for us from our last conversation. So I'm pleased with the information that we've gotten. I would like to see a little more organized budget. You know, there's more condensed on bigger topics and not the line item detail for projects. But how that all gets shifted around in the back for grant submissions or grant payments, I think we can deal with on that level. We don't need to have that in a budget. So be thinking about that too, if that makes any difference to anybody else besides me. But I would like to see those category instead of the line item detail. I'd like to see the project report that we have, of course, so that's always very important to make sure we know what projects that we're doing, but those can be listed under the project area, so. And we can have bigger dollars on those because that's where our big dollars usually are spent, are on those bigger project areas, but not the detail and not, you know, how the money gets moved around from a bookkeeping standpoint to satisfy the grants. That's just gets in the way, in my opinion. So it would be interesting to see a budget like that. If you can do it easily enough, Emily, so. You can just condense some of this line item stuff and not shift the dollars around as much as we do. But keep those in very succinct category areas. But we can talk about that afterwards. I'll talk to Mike about it as well. It may not be something that's easy to do.
Well, you do have a condensed version on the expense revenue chart. We discussed showing the increase in the grants, that's as condensed as you're gonna get, and from there, if you wanna take money in or out, you may have to get into some more detail on what projects you're gonna keep.
Well, how does she come up with this? It's still, isn't everything still broken down into those individual entries that you have to do? And that you explained for the grants, the grant dollars?
Yep, so this is a roll up of the detail, and I agree. I think focusing on this totally makes sense. And yeah, these are, so, you know, the permitting roll up. You don't see all the individual line items underneath, but the total for that program.
Yeah, and Emily, when you say it's a roll-up, it's a roll-up of all of the line items that we've been seeing in the reports that we've been getting, right? So all of those entries have already been made to pull it out of salary and into that line item, correct?
Yeah, so this 240,000 includes a small section of that staff amount.
Okay, okay. All right, I think I'm getting it now.
So one other point that we talked about the very leverage points, you know, you've got the revenue, and you've got the grants, et cetera, et cetera. But one other area that's really important is how we do in 2025.
Mhm.
So we need to look, and as treasurer, I'm gonna start looking at how we're doing against what we say we're gonna do. Because if we can actually save cost in 2025, then our carryover becomes much higher.
Mhm.
And right now it's been reduced because we're over budget by 400,000. If we get that to zero, we pick up 400,000. We don't have a problem going into the following year.
Mhm.
So we not only to worry about 2026, we
Right.
need to manage 2025 as
Right.
tight as we possibly can.
Right, well.
Everybody needs to make estimates of where they're gonna end up in their area.
Mhm.
If they come in under, fine. If they come over, then we have to find a way to make that up.
Emily's
So-
doing that though. I mean, she's already giving us estimates.
Right.
And that's on that first sheet, you know, which goes back to 2024, I think. So we see where 2024 ended. We were right in the middle of 25. We used to have another couple of columns that showed us 2020, would have shown us 2023 and 2022 year end. So we have more, but you know, I don't find those helpful because every year is so different with the number of projects that we're doing. And so I never found that helpful, except for the more static things, which is payroll, benefits, overhead. Those are important to have maybe a 5-year window, but not for the rest of it. Everything else is so driven by the science, the engineers digging into the next level of projects that we have on our plate. Most of those, you know, have been, obviously, we've done all of the other sub watersheds, so Little Comfort and Big Comfort are the only two left to do that kind of, once again, deep dive on the diagnostic studies to make sure that we've captured everything before we lay out a project plan, which will take, you know, up to 3 to 4 years. We don't have as big of a project, or excuse me, of a category list, but we deal with Forest Lakes stormwater, so that's gonna be bigger projects dollar wise as far as stormwater treatment is concerned. So anyway, yeah, maybe if we can, I'll take a look at this, and if you could show me what's rolled up into it. Just spend maybe 15 minutes with you, Emily. I can probably get there. All right, thank you.
The last thing is treasurer, I'm gonna work with Emily and do a roll up of what we talked about tonight.
Yeah.
And so you can see it more clearly how it's gonna impact this year and next year.
Yeah,
And then the assumptions I made to get to, we can look at it and down and we can go from there.
yeah, I think that's fine. Okay, anything anyone else wants to contribute? Is Mike back on? Is
Mike
Mike
is
back
on.
on? Okay. All right, Mike? Anything you want to add? Okay. He's there. You hear him?
I wonder if he's having trouble muting.
Yeah.
Or just the
He is up in
keeps dropping
Canada,
off.
so.
Hold on, let me try something. See if that will help him. Okay. In the meantime, do you want to talk about, follow-up tasks and scheduling the next meeting?
Yeah, I think we should do that, obviously. The next. I think what I would like to see, Steve mentioned working with you to, do the issues that he wants to address, which I think is great. You should work with her whenever you need to. And I would like to see, more of that roll up. Let's see what happens, with just what you and I talked about tonight. Understanding where you've got inputs that are part of salary, in what areas. Maybe we can just do a top level shift around on those numbers and then get to what I'm looking for.
Sure. And just to be clear, I get that number from Mike Kinney. I don't have the information to calculate it myself. He produces just that
Yes.
total. I don't have all the details.
And that's the only place that you do that, right? For payroll and salary benefits.
Yep,
Yeah.
I have all the other information. That's the only information I don't have.
Okay, so overhead is where it should be under administration. That's not
Yep.
tracked out. Okay, well, it's not gonna be as difficult as I thought then. All right, very good. I'll be in touch with you about that, okay?
Okay, I'll wait to
Okay,
hear from you.
goals for next meeting, I'd like to see us be ready to, at least be ready to discuss those cuts.
Mhm.
Whether you think they should be in or out and why,
Mhm.
so we can have that discussion next meeting.
To have that ready in the background, right?
Well, to have it to discuss it, because I can't move forward until I get
Mhm.
everybody's input on that, so
Okay.
I'm gonna use my own input to do the next scenario.
Mhm.
But I'm sure some of my opinions won't be much different than yours.
Sure,
Because we're thinking alike in terms of programs, so.
yeah,
And then also, we should definitely be thinking about as Manager Baki brought up, the key number here is whether we're gonna do 12% or 20% or 30% levy increase. So everybody should start thinking about that and preparing, your discussion on that, so we can start to have that discussion also.
yeah, I think a lot of it hinges though on what Red Path puts together for us on a bigger
Well, in July,
context.
we'll find out, so. And
We will. at
we'll
the end of
compare to
July.
what we have, and
We
we'll
will.
see how things
So
are.
why don't we just plan for one meeting early on in July? And if we need it, maybe as a placeholder. And then if we, I don't know what the end of July means for them, but if we can pull up a calendar real quickly.
One
Well,
moment.
4th of July is next weekend, so that's out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So it has to be one of the.
So
2 weeks after
it's
that.
gotta be 3 weeks from now. So let's go look into 3 weeks, brings us closer, right, to the end. Can you bring up the calendar?
Emily, when do we have to have this finalized by?
The end of August.
Okay,
September 15th is our deadline to certify the levy. And, obviously having the public hearing before that, we need to publish that public hearing. So I had us publishing that public hearing in early August and then holding the hearing itself on August 22nd.
We can get
We can
there.
change that if needed. Sorry, I'm just trying to pull up like a basic calendar.
July 14th is 3 weeks.
Yeah, I don't think that gives Red Path. What about that next meeting, that next week?
well, we should meet ourselves and then see what Red Path has to say at a separate meeting, maybe maybe it should be done at these meetings.
Yeah, I think it should be. Oh, there we go. Okay, so July. Our meeting is the 24th? Is that right?
10th and the 24th.
Okay, well, how about the 20? Oh, boy,
Here, let me zoom in on July.
yeah,
How about the 14th?
that Red Path won't be done then,
Well, we don't know when they're gonna be done, they might be done the 28th.
yeah,
And we have to have a meeting, we have to kind of get our act
Okay.
together before I hear what Red Path has to say.
okay.
So we have to take a position on what we think should be done and compare it to what they have to see if they can add value to what we've already struggled with. So having a meeting for us on the 14th and then having a meeting with them on the 28th would be fine, I think. Mondays seem to work for people. I don't know, well, I'm just presuming Mondays work better, but
We could have them at the meeting on the 24th. If we wanted to have them at a board meeting. Our meetings have not, our agendas have not been that huge, but I would expect that we wanted to have it more, not at a regular meeting,
Yes.
but, okay, all right. Everybody agree with that? Budget discussion should stay in workshop phase
Yep.
until we have a final budget.
I agree with
Present.
that. I agree with that.
All right, very good. Well, I'm okay then to reserve the 21st and the 28th of July.
I thought we mentioned the 14th. The 21st would not work for me. The
Okay,
14th works.
the 14th then.
14th looks good, yeah.
Yeah, and let's set aside the 28th for Red Path. And we'll just hold that. If that doesn't work, then we'll figure something else out for early August.
Just double checking my calendar.
Mhm.
Emily, you have the 14th, you might have a conflict.
Yeah, and I could schedule around that. I could make that work. 6 PM on the 14th.
Okay.
And then, yeah, 6 PM on the 28th. Okay, and President Anderson, it sounds like you'll coordinate directly with Red Path to get their schedule and get them working on this and get the cost estimate from them to do this work, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll call them tomorrow and get the schedule, excuse me, their schedule down. She did just say, like I said, at the end of July, I'll try to hone that down a bit. And then, get their schedules where they're available. I'll offer hours first, of course. Okay,
Okay, so we should find out how much you're gonna charge us and
Oh, yeah.
what they're gonna
Yeah.
do.
I thought I said that, yeah.
Okay, so does the board have to approve that, or it's a couple?
It'll come back to you.
Okay,
Hopefully it'll be soon rather than later.
it's just that they seem to be very expensive when we deal with them.
Well, you
Every time
know,
we ask them a question, we get
we're
a
not,
bill.
we're not tapping them all the time, but this is sort of a critical
Yeah.
junction, and we all agreed to it, so let's see what it costs, okay? All right, the concept, we've agreed to the concept, we'll find the cost.
And then if it's. Well, we can always have them come and review what we've done and comment on that too, so. That's a cheaper way of doing it, but
Well, the person I talked to knows our reports, she was the CPA. that
yeah,
came
they
in
should know
last
our
year.
business backwards and
And
forwards.
so they do, and what they're presenting to us is a new way to look at things.
Okay,
All right, and with their knowledge of all of these revenue sources and how they work and how they function, and working with other districts on what they've done in similar situations. We're not the first district to have a situation like this, so that knowledge is what we're paying for. And I'm looking forward to see what they have. And they're not gonna do this detailed line by line budget. What they're looking at is broader, higher level on what we need to do from a finance standpoint to do what's left for us to do in our work, particularly our government work. Or project work. When we get done with that phase, what we're going to have is maintenance, and our programs become a real part of that. That's probably the biggest part of what we're going to do in the future. We have maintenance and operations, of course, to maintain all of these projects that we've done. And then we also have, we still have to keep the engineers on staff. Because that's required by statute, and for sticky issues that might come up from time to time. So I do expect that we're going to see a lower budget at some point in the future, but it's not now. All right, very good.
okay, thanks, everyone.
Anything else from anyone? All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I
Good
will
night.
declare the meeting over. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Right.
We are adjourned.
Where's my